Welcome back. On your Do Now, you are explaining some of the positives and some of the negative things about the 1950s. Yesterday, we kind of recapped a lot of these things, trying to get your mind around this idea of like when we judge the 1950s, were they a good decade, a bad decade, great, terrible? Where would you sort of place them on this scale of to what extent were the 1950s a success? Now, today's our assessment, is our test. It is open note. So I've handed back everything I have. If you want to grab out your folder, go through your notes, get yourself organized, get your readings, your worksheets, everything figured out. We'll be starting the test in a minute. Couple quick reviews. Big ideas from the 1950s as we talked about the Cold War, this conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, and the reasons why the U.S. and the Soviet Union don't get along. Comes down to things like power, different ideas of communism versus capitalism. We talked about nukes, about building allies, spheres of influence. All those things lead to this Cold War. And a reminder, a Cold War is two countries that hate each other, that build up their militaries, threaten each other, use propaganda, strategize for potential war, but then the war never actually happens. We call that a Cold War. And America is ready for that World War III, but their plan for dealing with this is called containment. Contain the Soviet Union, contain communism, don't let it spread. We don't want to attack the Soviet Union, that'd be World War III. But anytime communism starts to spread, we need to step up some way. In some form, we need to try and stop that. Now, that might be war, that might be sending weapons and supplies to allies, something we need to respond whenever communism starts to spread. Because there's this fear of dominoes. Just like the game of dominoes, you line up all those pieces. If one falls, eventually they all fall. It's easier to stop that first one from falling than from catching it midway and putting those all back up. All right, so this fear that communism, once it starts spreading, won't stop. So the second it starts to spread, we need to be there to catch the dominoes. And the first time communism starts to spread is going to be in Korea. And we talked about how America sent troops and fought in the Korean War to defend South Korea to stop the spread of communism. During the Cold War era, we also talked about how Americans were sort of paranoid about communism and spies and this fear that they were already in the government. We called it McCarthyism or Red Scare. McCarthyism after a guy named McCarthy who tried to prosecute a lot of people for being communist. So communism affected us in internationally, but also at home. When we came back from break, we kind of shifted gears talking about the 1950s. We started looking at how America treats African Americans, as well as other races. And we talked about Jim Crow laws, racist, oppressive laws to stop African Americans from voting, but also creating segregation. We talked about a court case called Brown versus Board of Education that changes a lot of that, that basically says segregation is illegal, and how this sort of starts the civil rights movement because a lot of southern states are not going to listen to the Supreme Court when it tells them you have to desegregate. They try to keep it. And one of the first instances of protest against this is going to be in Montgomery, Alabama, with the bus boycott. Our buses were segregated. African Americans were mistreated, arrested, like Rosa Parks. And in response, they do a boycott. They refuse to ride the buses to try and cost the city a lot of money. And eventually the city has to give in and they desegregate their buses. This week we talked about Eisenhower as president, his successes, his failures. We talked about the culture of the 1950s to try and get an idea, a sense of just really how good were the 1950s. So like I said, your competency is open note. You get your choice for a lot of these questions. Be sure to fulfill the expectations for each one of these. All right, so if I ask you a level 1, I'm looking for just the right answer. A level 2, well, I'm looking for you to explain, give me lots of details. A level 3, I'm looking for answer, reason, evidence, and analysis. That's several sentences. And then the level 4, I have the whole writing guide for you, but you have to use the documents from yesterday. All right, we're saying just how good were the 1950s? If you have any questions, let me know.